There are a lot of you out here. Can everybody hear me okay in the back if I talk like this? Great. So kind of the way I want to do this, I want to be really interactive. So if you have a question at any point, just raise your hand. When I hit a good stopping point, I'll call on you, and I'll try to leave lots of time at the end for back and forth as well. I kind of consider this your time, and I'm trying to give you, as much as I can during this time. So it's about you, and take advantage of that and ask anything that comes to mind. So I'm going to kind of tell you about myself and my background and how I got to be on the stage, starting from pretty far back. And then I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about and what message I wanted to leave everybody with. And I thought about, going to some technical topic like how to write good C++ or how to tune a server for high performance load or something like that. And I kind of wasn't really excited about any of those. And I was thinking, you're all starting out in your career, and I wanted to go into what I wish somebody had told me when I was starting out. And I'm sure that Cami tells you a lot of these things, and your instructors probably tell you a lot of these things, but I just wanted to give you my perspective, given what my journey has been. So I started programming when I was about 11 years old on a DOS computer in a language called QBasic. Have any of you ever used QBasic? Or yeah, few hands. That's I'm dating myself a little bit. So my dad had a computer. I was fortunate enough to have one of those in the home. I just, this was before the internet was a thing, and I was bored, and sometimes I finished my book and I went and I just kind of played around and, would make like really simple games like blackjack or something like that. And then I got to high school, and I got a TI-83 calculator, and I've always been pretty good at math and was pretty fast at finishing it, and so I would sit around bored in class a lot, and I just learned to program kind of basic games like Snake, just for myself at that point in time. So really, and I really never thought I thought that was going to be the end of my game development career. I went into college and I studied math and physics. I got recruited out of college into a little startup that did consulting, and got recruited into a little startup that did consulting, and then did kind of like business programming consulting work for about 3 or 4 years. And then I moved to Seattle, and just sort of through happenstance, I got into games. I was looking for a job out here, and I found a contract position at Microsoft working on Connected Ventures. I don't know if any of you do any of you have a copy of that? Yeah, so my picture is actually in the manual for it. If you look, I think it's on like page 20 something, like way in the back. So that was sort of my break into, or how I broke into professional games. At that point, I'd kind of been programming, a little while, and I kind of came at it from the different side of it from where you guys are. Where you guys are all learning games from the beginning, I kind of just played them and then got lucky. So then after about a year and a half, a couple years of contracting, I really wanted to find something that was a little more stable. So I applied at PopCap, which is just, I think they're still down the street from here. Got an interview there. At the time, I actually had a mohawk, so it was sort of, looked a little less conservative than I do now. I wore it up to the interview because I wanted to make sure it was like a place that was cool and all that. And I did well enough. I got the job. I kind of worked. I started off doing server development for them, and my time there, I did a lot of backend systems, but I also got to work on some games there. So probably the biggest one that many of you have heard of is Plants vs. Zombies 2. So.
Rockstar right here.
Yeah, so I did a few of the plants. If you use the laser beam, that was me. And I did, I put the ads in the game.
Capitalism.
Has to make money. Actually, a funny story about that. At one point, the ads broke. And I thought that everyone was going to be like, yeah, the ads break. People actually called in to complain because there was a feature that you watch ads for more in-game, currency, and they couldn't do that. And so people were like, we want you to fix the ads. And I was like, okay, we'll do that. That wasn't. And then after that, I was at PopCap for about 4 years. After that, I've kind of been out of games. I've worked at an ed tech startup for a couple years. Then I was very briefly at Amazon. Didn't really like it there, so I had some friends at Pluto who I actually went to lunch with a friend of mine, Walker, and he said, hey, you should come over and work for us. So I interviewed at Pluto, was there for about a year. We did VR telecommunications, a great group of people. Definitely recommend going up to the meetups. I'm friends with pretty much everybody there, and I highly recommend getting to know them, and they're generally all people that will be helpful if you are starting out in your career. And I left that to become a CTO of a startup. So for about 2 months now, it's called Hummingtree, and we're doing ads for small businesses, which is probably not that interesting for anybody in this room right now if you're all studying games, but it's really, it's attractive to me about it is I just like building things, and I get to kind of build a team and build everything from the ground up, and I kind of like getting to, it's really, I don't know, I don't really like big environments. I like smaller environments for a lot of reasons, and just getting the opportunity to be a founder is really, really exciting. So that's kind of it's a high level over my background. In the next, I'm about to get into kind of a little more depth about working in games and kind of things I wish I'd known when I started. But I've seen a few hands go up, so I'm going to give everybody a chance to ask questions. I think yours was first.
How long did you guys spend on the development of Plants vs. Zombies 2?
So that's
What
interesting.
was the question? I didn't
How long did they spend on the development of Plants vs. Zombies 2?
Yeah. I'll repeat them all from now on just to make sure everybody can hear. So the question was, how long was Plants vs. Zombies 2 in development? And that's actually a really complicated question, or a really complicated answer to that question. So I was on that project for probably about, so from the one hand, it's still in development, right? There's still a team, still know a lot of people in the team that's actively developing it. So it's been in development, since launch 4 or 5 years ago. Before that, there were, I think I was on the project for about a year to a year and a half before it launched. And before that, there was a lot of prototyping and different versions of the game beforehand. So arguably, it maybe was in development from the day that Plants vs. Zombies 1 shipped. The team that shipped it was probably there about 2 years beforehand. So it's kind of hard for me to answer because there's not really like a date where everybody got in a room and said, today we will start on Plants vs. Zombies 2. It just sort of evolved out of experimenting with things to get there. And then you, yes.
Me?
Yes.
Cool. I actually am curious about like how it goes, how you build a team while working without how you do the recruiter thing, how you do the business side of things. As a designer / potential producer, that's something that really interests me, and I want to hear your input on how one would go about building a team for a small new company.
Yeah. Boy, that's a whole talk in and of itself.
I'm
and I'm still, no, that's a great question. I'm always learning all this too. So this is just one person's perspective. But I think when I hire, I look for people who are people who have humility, people who are going to approach things from a learning perspective, people who are I'm not going to say easy to get along with because I'm not saying everybody has to be an extrovert, but people need to be pleasant and need to be easy to work with, basically. And the reason for that is that I think, I've been programming a long time. I know tech really well. I can teach people pretty much any technical skill they don't have coming in. That any technical deficiency will fix itself in 3 or 4 months. And honestly, if somebody just doesn't have the skills, it's not, I fortunately have not really had to let anybody go over this, but it's a pretty easy conversation. That's obvious, and that's something that you can fix. If somebody's just a jerk, that is not a thing that's hard to fix. Like you can't really teach somebody to just not be a jerk or to suddenly communicate things or to show up on time or whatever. So those are actually the things I think are harder to change. So I know right now in the industry we do a lot of really hardcore technical interviewing. I've been through some of those terrible whiteboard interviews, and I think there's a certain technical bar that you need to clear to be a programmer, but I think it's really a lot more important that you are somebody that will interact well with others, and that's really a lot more what I hire for, because the technical stuff is honestly it's a lot more teachable. I mean, you guys are all learning it right now, and I trust that if any of you needed to, any developers need to learn a new language or artists need to learn a new tool, they could do that. In terms of recruiting channels, number one is through my network. Right? The easiest way to hire people is to go ask somebody you've worked with before, who do you think is good that's looking for a job right now, and bring that person in for an interview. It is so much cheaper than going through recruiters or through a job board. It's my first go-to. And there are some downsides to that in terms of diversity hiring, because people in your network are likely to be a lot like you, and I try to be cognizant of that. And honestly, I'm still trying to figure out the right balance there. So I'd love anybody's perspective on how to navigate those things. But when you're small, you should do the thing that is there's already so much risk in starting a business that if you can avoid any risk you don't have to take on, you should, I think. And so hiring people that come with a good referral is sort of the way to go. Past that, yeah, it's just recruiters and job boards. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you
Yeah.
so much. That was really good.
Yes.
So when you were programming on your calculator, were you using TI Basic or Z80 assembly?
TI Basic, yeah. I didn't know assembly at that point, so I just had the basic interpreter and did that. It's funny because as the snake got longer, I got like perceptibly slower as time went on. Okay, any other questions? Yes?
Was it difficult developing for mobile compared to now?
Yes. So, mobile is, it's interesting because I've kind of been through a few generations of technologies now. Like I started on desktop apps, and then web apps are really popular. Now mobile is definitely the big thing. And yeah, when I started, the tooling just wasn't what it is now. So it was, just everything was new. So nothing worked 100% the way it was supposed to, and now it's definitely a lot more mature. On the other hand, things are a lot more complicated now. So because of that, there's more there you have to learn. So when I started, it was simpler, but it was harder because there were less tools for you. Now there are more things you have to learn, but I think the things are better once you learn them. Does that answer? Yeah. Anybody else? Great. So yeah, I think about the things that I kind of wish that I had known when I started out. So my first company I worked at, that consulting startup, I basically had no support system. So it was it was a great opportunity. I'm really grateful that I got to get into programming when I did. It was a totally remote company in 2004. So a lot of the tools, video chat was not very mature at that point, for instance. Like Skype was very new. We didn't use source control, for instance, which sounds crazy now. Like we didn't have any project management system. There was no real, basically I would zip everything up I'd been working on and I would upload it to a web dev drive every month or so, and then the owner of the company would look at it and be like, yeah, that looks good. I think that's what I want. And that was sort of our system. And it actually, it worked okay for what it was. Like that business was self-sustaining. It just, we didn't do anything that complicated is really why it worked. Like we made kind of reports against databases and things like that. The one thing I did get though was that our founder, while not the technically most savvy person in the world, had a really good business background, and he did kind of teach me to really listen to customers, and that's really how you should, the importance of actually giving people the thing that they want as opposed to the thing that you think they want. Yeah.
Do you use P4V these days?
Perforce? I haven't used Perforce in years, but there are still shops out there that do. I use Git most of the time now. Yeah. Started at that startup. Then basically I kind of operated like that for about 3 or 4 years. And as you might imagine, I didn't actually grow that much. I got a little bit better at doing things that way, but I would say like the first 4 or 5 years of development, I really just wasn't very good at it. And I would say even at, when I was at Microsoft, it was a little bit better. That was the first time I'd really worked on a large team. But when I was there, it was a very, very old school sort of development mentality. Like it was, 80-hour weeks, crunching all the time. There was a lot of people in the code base, so it was a little bit more disciplined than where I'd worked for before. That, for example, we used Perforce, or actually we used Microsoft's internal fork of Perforce, which is its own separate fun can of worms. But that was, even then, I think it really wasn't much of a team environment, right? Like it was still a lot of everybody kind of had their area of the code they worked in. They worked in it. They would check it in. One of the things I owned was the build system, for instance, and I remember whenever it was near critical deadline, I would get up at 2 or 3 in the morning and I would check to make sure the build was going to be ready for the next day so it could be QA'd. And so, most places I think have kind of moved beyond that as a way of developing, but it's sort of where the industry was. I look back on it now, and I was in my early 20s at that point, and so I had kind of the stamina to do it, but I just don't think I could do that now. I think, I was tired all the time, and I don't think I made really good decisions because of that. When I was stuck on something, I would try really, really hard to figure it out on my own, and then I kind of viewed it as like a failure if I went and asked somebody for help. I didn't really have a good mentor to help me out at that point in time. It was better than being on my own in a room, but it still wasn't, I still wouldn't say like I grew some, but it wasn't, it wasn't like a great environment for learning. And, if I could do it all over again, I just would have worked 40-ish hours a week most of the time. I don't think I got anything from putting on those extra hours, honestly. I think I did it a lot, and I think too, working hard is really important, and being disciplined when you show up and producing results is important. I just think if you're tired and you're miserable all the time, like, you are just not going to do a good job. You're not going to, your health suffers. It's not a great environment. So, one of the things I definitely learned from there was to take good care of yourself. You need to, it's important to work hard. There are times where a few extra hours are called for, like the day before a big release or the week before a big release. But most of the time, you need to, if you show, like, the barrier, or the metric I use is when I wake up in the morning and I get into the office, if I feel tired or I feel cranky, then I take a second and I look at, like, why is that, right? Like, was I at work till 7 the night before? Did I get enough sleep last night? And I pay attention to that and I fix that thing, because that really does impact your work and the quality of what you produce. And two, since then I've learned it's okay to just go ask for help. Like, there were times I would spend a week or two on something stuck, and I should have just gone to somebody who knew better and been like, hey, I don't know this. Let's fix that. Which is a scary thing to do, I think, especially when you're starting out, you don't have a lot of confidence in your own skills. And so, there's this joke I hear. The difference between a junior engineer and a senior engineer is that a senior engineer asks stupid questions. I think there's a lot of truth to that. So that's sort of my Microsoft time. It was good. I learned, it was really my intro to games, which was cool. Got to ship a game that went out to 10 million people, which was really awesome. I do have to say, like, one of the highlights was actually a thing I still kind of do is occasionally, I'll go over to somebody else's house for a party or something, and I see it less because everybody has kind of donated their connects to Goodwill now. But back when you had those, I would be like, I'll bet you $5 is a picture of me in your house. And everyone would be like, okay, I see you have a trick. I'm not taking that bet. But then I would get to go, find it and everything, which was cool. So I definitely learned that, actually, like, shipping something out to people, to customers, is, like, really, really rewarding. I mean, when you get to, like, see somebody play a thing that you built, there's a magical moment in that is really hard to reproduce in other industries. And actually, that's probably the thing I miss most about games. I've gotten in and out of games throughout my career. I'll probably work in games again someday. Maybe I'll hire one of you when that happens. But it's there's something about just, like, watching a person use the thing that you built that is, like, there's no, in business apps you kind of get a little bit of that, but it's not quite the same, because nobody loves that, ad serving platform that you built the same way they love that game. Sorry, you had another question?
You said it first.
Oh.
So you've obviously been you've been on the ground level, you've been as a manager, you've been as a boss, and you've also seen different types of teams. Like you said, at Microsoft is very, like, you have your core project, you don't really interact with anyone else. You've probably also been on a team where it's, like, very interactive with other people. What would you say, like, where do you think the most potential for, like, moving a product out? Like, what environment is the best, would you say?
Yeah. Great question. So the question is, I've been in a lot of different environments. I've been kind of from the bottom, working my way up from the bottom to being a manager. What sort of, in terms of collaboration, what sort of environment is the best? Is that
optimal.
just optimal? Yeah. I think close collaboration is the best. I think that, I think probably the hardest part about software development in general, including games, and probably this is true of building anything. I have friends in other industries, and I talk with them about this. It's just communicating. It's understanding what other people are doing and working with them. Most of the time, the hard tech, data structures and algorithms, all that stuff is important. That stuff you can look up, right? Like, it's out there. Working with other people is really the thing that is, I think, the hardest to get right. And also I spend time managing, so that just might be my perspective, because those are the problems I think about a lot. But so for example, our startup right now, I spend most of my day pair programming with somebody else. Like, we literally work on the same machine side by side, and it's because having that sort of continuous feedback on your work, I think it just makes the quality of the work so much better than what you do in a vacuum, and B, you learn so much more, so much faster. C, I also can take vacations, and I know somebody else knows about all the systems I work on, which is kind of nice. So right now, our first hire was a pretty junior, fresh out of college engineer, And I've watched him grow so much in the last 2 months because we're sitting next to each other every day. And typically it takes, probably a year or two of somebody working on their own before I really feel like they can take on, something that's pretty meaty. And because, he's getting exposure to somebody who has that experience a lot, he's growing really fast. And so actually he's flying solo right now for the first time, so I'm really interested to see what happens when I come back. But I actually have a lot of confidence that he's not going to, I think he's going to make a lot of progress in that time. And then, even with more experienced people, I think that sitting next to each other, collaborating side by side, focused on the work, but still, with that sort of collaboration is really valuable because it just keeps you from getting stuck on stupid stuff. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've spent half an hour looking for a missing bracket somewhere, and if there was just somebody there who was like, you missed a bracket, it would have been faster. Like, the essence of what we do is not type really fast to write code, it's think about problems and design things, and that's something that is better done as a collaborative process than in a vacuum. Not to say that you shouldn't ever go off on your own and build something or design, but I think, my perspective is definitely hard on the, I want people to collaborate, I want them to talk with each other, I think that product development is a team sport. I think game development is a team sport, and the more you can be a multiplier for the people around you, the better it is.
Thank you.
I'm going to take this guy. You with the vest.
What would you recommend for working on a project solo, then how do you recommend to keep your productivity up in a solo environment?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I've worked in a lot of solo environments too, and I also want to say that when I say collaborative environments work, that's what works better for me. That's not true of everybody. There are people that work very well solo, and it's not one's right, one's wrong. It's find a system that works for you. And actually, kind of my answer is build a system, build a routine, build some discipline in to do that. Figure out how you're going to get feedback into that. So for instance, if you're, I'm a big believer in demoing products. Every week I make sure that somebody sees the thing that I've been working on who didn't work on it, so that they can tell me if I'm on track or off track. And so I think if I'm working on an indie game, for instance, I would make sure to cut a build, put it on a device every week, carry it around with me, just ask, hey, what does this look like? Is this working? There are a lot of practices that you can use, like setting up a build system. I still think is valuable if you're a single person, just so that if your machine melts down, you're sure it builds on at least one other machine. But I think, probably the hardest thing for me about working by myself is actually just working, oddly enough. I really enjoy programming, and I really enjoy building things. I enjoy writing. I have a hard time getting started. I wake up in the morning and I'm really glad I have an office to go to, because I will sit and drink a cup of coffee and read the news on my iPad for 2 hours, and then maybe I'll go take a shower at that point if I don't have some sort of structure. So I really rely. When I'm working on something, I make sure I've got a thing I've got to do at a certain time so that I have that structure. So my day is usually 9 o'clock. I'm in the office, catch up on email for 15 minutes, work until noon, take a lunch, take a break from 1 to 3, I work, take a 15-minute break at 3, work until 5, and then maybe, at that point I go home, right? Or maybe work until 6, whatever schedule, works for you. And I think that's, having that, building a system and then modifying your system and taking some time to think about how you work, I think is really important for that. It's also true in a team environment, but I think when you're solo, it's extra important to do that. Does that answer your question?
Hopefully this will be as long. You mentioned a bit about self-care and about taking care of your mental health and your physical health while you're in the industry. And I feel like especially recently with all the coming to light of and backlash against crunch time and stuff like that, I feel like it's important for us as students who are going into the industry to know how to do that and how to stand up for yourself if you're in a situation where an employer is forcing you to do more than is healthy to you. Is there recourse for that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And my answer to that has honestly always been to just find another job when I'm there, because it's hard to, if somebody's a jerk, it's hard to fix that, as I kind of alluded to before. I think too, there have been times where, so number one, when you're earlier on your career, unfortunately, you just have less leverage, and you also will probably work harder in the first year or two than you will ever again, because you have a lot to learn. So just to set expectations, first couple years, I really would expect, not 80 hours a week, but 50 hours a week might be reasonable for somebody. And it is really important to buckle down and work hard, and you should expect to do that. That said, if you are, suffering from mental health problems, or like you're not sleeping enough, or you don't have time to meet your obligations to, if you have a family or something like that, like, absolutely, I think, your health and your family should come first. Like, no question about that. And, I've always I've always kind of taken the tack, and it's mostly served me well, that if I get fired for doing my best work and being a professional about it, I'm kind of fine with that. I also have the privilege of having enough experience and a good enough network. I always know I can go find something else, so that kind of comes with it. But I always think it's really important to, I set clear expectations of what I'm going to do, what I'm going to produce. I meet those expectations, and then people, yell at me for not coming in enough, then I just find another job, because why would you stick around if you don't have to? And if you don't have, if you have to stick around because you have to, it's a tough situation, and I don't think there's no good answers there.
Thank you so much.
I want to build on that.
Mm-hmm.
We have OSHA, state labor laws.
Mm-hmm.
We have congressmen. We have power to defend ourselves from abusive bosses. Look it up. It'll help you.
Yeah, that's true. And remember, talking to HR reps is something you can do as well. The one caution I have is, remember that HR is there to protect the company from liability, not to help you out. But if the company is taking on liability for that, then they might be a help. But I would also just say this: like, if you're going to take a legal recourse against your employer, which I'm not giving you legal advice, but it's likely to have an effect on that relationship. And again, if you can get another job, like, I think the easiest thing to do is just to get out. Like, don't stick around toxic people if you don't have to be around them. But that said, like, definitely look into those resources. I don't support abusive labor practices. I think that the industry has a problem that it really needs to look at. So it's complicated. Yep.
On the topic of leaving a job,
Mm-hmm.
how does one go about doing that while not entering a period of, not being in actual work, while also being polite to, let's say that there is a better opportunity out there
Mm-hmm.
for you and you can get it. How do you apply to that job?
Mm-hmm.
Get yourself out of your current job politely, while also not necessarily being laid off for a couple days?
Yeah. So your question is, like, how do you gracefully exit a job and start a new job?
Yeah.
If you need to. Yeah. Great question, man. You guys are not pitching slow balls at me today. Yeah. So, first of all, switching jobs is a very normal thing to do as a professional. I think that a lot of people have anxiety about that, and I have worked for one of my best friends before, and I have left his team for a better job, and he and I still, we're in the same D&D group, right? Like, didn't affect our personal relationship at all. So I think, if you're working in an environment where people are pretty professional, I know, like, if somebody who reports to me wants to find another job, my response is always, just to wish them well and to let them, tell them if they want a reference, I'll give them one, because, I want people to work for me who want to work for me. I don't want people to work for me because, they're afraid of going somewhere else, right? That said, not everybody is as cool about it, right? There are people out there who are, kind of try and manage you out or something when they find that. So, first of all, I've always had another job lined up before I've left a job, even if I didn't like the job I was at before and really, really, really was ready to go, which has happened to me. It puts a lot of pressure on you when you have to find a job quickly because you don't have a job, especially if you're early in your career and you don't have savings built up yet. So what I would typically do in that situation is I would polish off my resume. I'd hit up my professional network, because hopefully I know people who work at other places. You all actually have this wonderful professional network baked in here of all of these other students in the room who hopefully you keep in touch with, and one of you find something, you recommend each other and all that. I would take a day to interview, right? So you actually have to go to that, and if you can take a day off, take a day off. I've known people, I've even taken a sick day to go to an interview. I think that's a little shaky in terms of the legal stuff there, but people do it, and I've never heard of there being a problem with that. Again, I'm not a lawyer, this is not legal advice, but people do it all the time. So, you just find something else, right? Like, and I devote my energy to that, right? Like, when I'm in the office, I show up for the time I'm required to be there. I do the work, and then I go home and I, look actively. The one thing I will say too is that reputation really does follow you around everywhere you go. I have ran into people, years later that I worked with, and making sure that you exit a job gracefully and making sure that you treat everybody as well as you can while you're interacting with them is incredibly important, because things really do come back later. And fortunately, I've been, pretty good about treating people well through most of my career, but I've seen people get burned really, really badly by that. So, I know it's tempting to just like walk off the job, put in 2 weeks, even if you hate it, unless it's a really, really bad, egregious situation, like put in 2 weeks notice or whatever your contract requires, thank everybody for the opportunity, and then you never look back if you are ready to leave. And I've also been at jobs that I liked and interviewed for other jobs because I thought it might be a good opportunity. Again, it's on you. Nobody will manage your career but you, and you need to, it is a professional thing to interview for other jobs just to see what's out there. It's not a betrayal of the company you're working for to do that. In fact, it's your responsibility yourself to manage your own career. Did you have a follow-up to that, or?
I do have a follow-up, but alright. Okay. So when you are about to leave a job, let's say that you're in the middle of a project, which I'm assuming that's probably what it's going to be like in most situations. How do you interact with your boss and tell them, hey, I have to go to this new job, and I know I have some responsibilities left to do? How do you hash that out with them?
Yeah. So, that's why you give notice. So that's what 2 weeks notice or whatever that is for them to find a replacement and for you to document whatever you need to document to train for the next person to be trained. B, you have, my view is you have a responsibility to do your best work for your employer up until the day you leave, and the day you leave, that responsibility goes away. And so, when I've done this before, my conversation has always been like, hey boss, can I have a word with you for a second? And at that point I kind of know something's up, and I go, hey, just want you to know I've really enjoyed my time, or I've gotten a lot. I appreciate the opportunity I've had to work here. I found another opportunity that I have accepted that I think is a better fit for the direction that I want to go into. I hope I'm leaving on good terms. Butter. This is my 2 weeks notice. I'll also be delivering it to you in writing, via email immediately after this conversation. I want to work with you to make sure this transition is as smooth as possible, and then stop right there, because it's actually your boss's job to figure out what to do if you leave. And if they don't have a good plan for that, they're not doing their job, and it's not. So, work with them, tell them that you want to work with them, but if, my view as a manager is if I lose one employee and then I'm just hosed and I lose that employee, that's not their problem, that's my problem. I probably should have done more work to make sure they were happy here, or I should have made sure that, other people were trained up and able to do that. So really, and it might suck for them when you leave. In fact, it probably will, because probably you did good work and there's a hole that's left there, but that's business, and that's kind of their problem now.
So you said you were like programming, you've been like learning all this stuff, like not like with like help like from the internet or some of that type of stuff. What would your like major tips be to people who are becoming programmers or starting to like get like really in depth in programming? What would be like your top tips to those people who are trying to find like a good job for programming? Yeah.
So the question is, what are my top tips for people who are learning to program to learn the skills they need to find a good job? So I think there's, programming is such a broad discipline that it depends a lot on what you want to do. I think in terms of technical skills, there's really not a replacement for just building things. My brother got a job at Google without a degree because he built a really, really interesting utility to remove duplicate items from a file that was really incredibly well optimized, and learned enough from that to get through the interview. And so I think that, the way that I've learned most things is I have kind of set a goal for myself, and I have just figured out how to reach that goal. In terms of resources, Google or DuckDuckGo or whatever search engine you use is your friend. I have a pretty big library of books on everything from like math to management to systems architecture to designing distributed systems to graphics to like you name it. I mean, and I really literally mean like hardback books on my shelf that my girlfriend really wants me, fiance now, really wants me to take to the office. Thank you. That actually happened this weekend, by the way. I just got engaged. So thanks. Thanks. Yeah, it's
We
cool.
got that on tape now.
Good. So it's legal now. Great. Yeah. So, set high goals for yourself and get as far as you can, and just build it. Like, figure out something cool and make it work. I think that's the best way to learn.
This is maybe a little bit specific, but it might ring true with some other people. The best way, obviously, to network is to meet people in the industry by
Mhm.
going out, meeting people at functions or
Mhm.
whatever. But as someone who goes to school 3 days a week and then works 4 days a week,
Yeah.
I have trouble finding anything like any time. So what would you recommend someone who's like pretty busy to still make? Like, what avenues would you recommend still meeting people?
Yeah. So, everybody. I think that there's this idea of networking, that you like go to events and you meet people and you get a job through that, and I think that works for some people. I actually don't really do that personally. Right? Like, I never really have. I don't mind getting up here and speaking, but I actually just don't like rooms full of strangers where I have to interact with them one-on-one, which might resonate with some of you. I instead try to invest in like a few really strong relationships, and maybe more than a few now. But I think most of you in this room, probably all of you, are going to go on to get a good job doing something in games, right? And if everybody in this room thinks that you are awesome, then odds are very good that in a year they will be in a position to refer you. And when they do that, when you're looking for a job, you can say like, hey, person sitting to my left right now, is your company hiring, right? You said that somebody just got a job at Harebrained Schemes, like maybe Henry, was that his name?
Henry.
Right, maybe send Henry an email if he remembers you. Kind of an important part of that is that you want to make sure that people remember you well, and I think that that's really the key. Take the time to listen to people, help other people out, make sure that they want to work with you, and I think that's really the best thing you can do, because in your position, like if you just don't have time to get out and go to a meetup, like you don't have time to go out and get to a meetup, these are probably the best, the people in this room are probably the best people you're going to meet in terms of finding jobs. And frankly, like people at your first job are going to be probably the people who get you your second job, and people in your second job are probably going to be people who get you your third job, and so on. I found, so to give you an idea of like how well that's worked for me, I found my first job, a friend from high school got me. I was looking for a job like washing dishes as I was studying math, and he was like, do you want to come work at a startup? It pays $16 an hour and you can work remotely. And I was like, wow, that's way better than washing dishes, absolutely. And so, I made, in software terms, peanuts for years, but it was better than the alternatives were. I found my PopCap I found through a recruiter I'd worked with before, so that one maybe wasn't a referral. But everything since then, like NLearn was a referral for me. There were a lot of ex-PopCappers who went there. It was the EdTech startup. Pluto was a bunch of ex-PopCappers who I stayed in touch with, who thought well with me. Even the CTO position, oddly enough, actually another ex-PopCapper, oddly he, one of the original co-founders of Hummingtree got in touch with him to see if he wanted to be CTO. He had just accepted a job at Google, so he wasn't really a change. So he was like, hey, I know this Matt guy, maybe you should talk to him. And now I'm a CTO, apparently. Which is still kind of weird. But it's really just because, and the reason that, it's not because, I think I'm a good programmer. I'm not the best programmer I've ever met. It's not about being the best. It's about making sure that people want to work with you and people feel comfortable, that if they refer you, you're gonna represent them well and you're gonna be good to work with. So be really nice to everybody is really the advice. Yeah. You never know where it's gonna come from. I got a referral. Actually, when I went to Amazon, I got a referral from one of my then girlfriend's friends who's a director there, who she knows through belly dance, right? So it's like this weird, like not even a professional connection, but we had traveled a little bit together, and she was like, "Oh, Matt seems like a nice guy. I feel comfortable doing that." So, yeah.
Can you tell us a bit about Pluto?
Can you be a little more specific?
I don't actually know what I want to know about.
Okay. Yeah, so Pluto is an interesting company. I'll talk about their product because, so they're developing VR telecommunications, meaning the idea is that they want it to feel like you're in the same room, even if you're not in the same room when you're talking. And they're using VR equipment as kind of the current gen way of doing that. And obviously as AR and everything becomes more mature, they'll switch to that. So it's kind of games adjacent in that it uses a lot of games technologies. Like they're all built on Unity, but there's a lot of things that are more like a telecom app in that they need to have really high reliability in terms of communications infrastructure. So it's kind of like a merger of the two. In terms of working there, it was really interesting because when I was there, they've since stopped this, but they tried this thing where they didn't have managers and called it shared management, and it was like, I would call it like a particle accelerator for learning about management practices, because you got to see like, it was sort of like reinventing everything from the ground up. It was an amazing experience from a learning perspective. I think that they learned a lot from it, and they've kind of shifted directions now and gone to something else. But yeah, it's also just, it's a good group of people. All the engineers there I know. Andy used to work with at PopCap, who's still there, and then it's just a really great group of people I would recommend going and meeting. Heather, who I think now is like a project manager, I think she just changed her title, was the one who recommended me here, and she does most of the meetups. I think that she was, I think you and Heather know each other.
Yeah, some of you probably get emails from Heather, because she organizes a lot of the meetups and volunteers. She's a great person to know in Seattle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, highly recommend getting to know Heather. So speaking of that, like if you were going to meet one person from my network who would help you out, Heather is probably that person, because she knows basically everybody and can open those doors. And what you'll get from a referral too is not, like, you won't get a job from that, but you'll just get the first conversation, and that's probably what you need for most people. It's just, that somebody knows you.
But being a volunteer with somebody like Heather, she's going to see that you showed up. She's going to see how you work, how you talk to people. So you're going to begin to build a trust with somebody at a game jam or at a volunteer gig. You could be volunteering for something like Habitat for Humanity. It doesn't even have to be for a game or a tech company. You're going to meet those people just by showing up at something and being reliable and being good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where did you learn the shared management idea?
Structure and accountability is really important. I think, so interestingly enough, like, I really believe in a flat structure. I don't like a lot of hierarchy. I think that I want people to generally be able to make decisions on their own about how to do their work, and I think there's even a lot of research that backs that up. I do think I learned kind of where my limits are on that, though, because that was, let's turn that up to 11, and I really think that should only be at 10, because I think that you just need somebody to give you feedback about your work and some structure about how you organize things. And I think that my view at this point on process and systems is that it's really important to have some process. What that process is not as important, and it's also very important that you're able to change whatever your process is based on whatever your needs are right then, and to be really clear about how you make that change. So if I'm working by myself, I write down what my schedule is going to be, I keep a calendar, and I do that. I can change whatever's on my calendar, but I do what's on my calendar so that at least I'm just forced to think about it a little bit. If I'm working on a team, we do planning every week, and at the end of the week we do a demo. And we can replan in the middle of the week if we need to, but we just have some structure to do that. And if we need to change how we work, then anybody on the team can basically change that. And so I think that it's important to just have that base level of we all agree to work together a certain way, and without that it's really hard to get anything done because it's not really clear what anybody's doing or why they're doing it. So I think I saw somebody in the back. Yes.
How often do you see people kind of traverse out of the game industry and then back in? Is it a frequent thing that you have to go into other software development? Or is it easy enough to stay inside the industry?
I've seen both. I think that some people just are in love with games and do it all the time. I really like playing games, and I like certain parts about making them, and sometimes I just want to play games. So I think some people it's what they want to do, and they know it, and they don't want to do anything else, and they stay in it. And I think that some people go back and forth, and everybody has a different thing that works for them. I think that probably I would say as a trend, people who start in games tend to stay in games, and people who come into games from the outside, like I did, tend to go back and forth a little bit more. But that's not always true. I've known people who go from games to leave it and then do other stuff. I think it really is about kind of figuring out what works for you there.
I have a question.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about, as a programmer doing the whiteboard test, or it must be really nerve-wracking to get up there with people watching you and say, okay,
Yeah, I've flat out bombed them before, and I'm like pretty good at that sort of thing. Yeah, whiteboard interviews. So my advice on interviewing is do it a lot. Try to get don't it. So the software interviews. My opinion on software interviews right now is that they're just not very good. Like they don't actually tell you what you would want out of an interview, and they're pretty bad. They're pretty miserable to go through as an interviewee. So, and I think that that's. But unfortunately, you've got to do them because the whole industry kind of does them that way now, and you do those whiteboard interviews. So, I think my advice is if you're looking for a job, don't put all your eggs in one basket because you will have off days. You will have interviewers that are having bad days and just don't, or just not good interviewers. And so you just shouldn't expect to get the first job that you interview to. I typically, when I'm looking for a job, I apply to 3 to 5 places every single day. I treat it like a near a full-time job, at least 6 hours a day of doing that. And then I just try and book as many interviews solid as I can, and I just don't worry too much about any of them individually. So I treat every interview as a opportunity to learn about how to interview next time until I finally get one that goes well enough. And to make it even worse, like you'd think that after doing this for 15 years, 14 years, whatever it is, that I would feel better about interviewing, and I don't. Every single time I go to do it, I have to learn it all over again because you just it's not at all like writing real code. It's not at all like real management or any of that. Like you just go in and you make a bunch of stuff up. I mean, you don't lie, but you tell a story about yourself, and every time that you have to tell that story, it's a little bit different. And so I don't know. I just expect that I have to interview 20 places before I'm going to get the job I want. So, and it sucks, by the way. I hate it. You just have to do it. And my goal is not to get job offers, it's to get rejections. I just try and get as many rejections as I can as quickly as I can. And that way, I'm just not that disappointed by it. And eventually I get a job offer and it's fine. Yeah.
How often do you try getting a job that you think you're underqualified for?
Oh, all the time. Man, I am like, holy crap. That's, so, I didn't finish my degree. I'm actually kind of going back to doing that a little bit on the side online. But like I don't have any formal training in management. I've had some good mentors. I'm pretty much self-taught as a programmer. Like every time I walk into that interview, I'm like, I probably don't belong here. This guy probably has like a master's or PhD or something. Probably don't know, what's gonna happen. So here's the real secret is that, and I think this is true of like most professionals, is that nobody knows how to do their job when they start, and everybody learns how to do their job on the job. And that just should be your expectation. Like, don't let other people. I have always taken the philosophy of I will try and do what I think is interesting to do next, and if other people tell me that I can't do it, then I won't do it. But I've seen a lot of, I've done this too, but the thing you don't want to do is you don't want to hold yourself back from trying it, because you might really be what they're looking for. I hire a lot of people not because I think they know what they need to know on day one, but because I think they're very trainable. And that might be what that manager is looking for. Job postings are also usually really inaccurate. Like, usually what happens is some HR person goes to a manager and goes, hey, you've really got to write a job posting for that. And the manager's like, oh crap, I've got 100 things to do. Let me just copy the one I used last time and paste it in here. And maybe I'll change a sentence or something, and that's kind of it. So I wouldn't even assume that the qualifications in the job posting are what people are looking for. Like, apply for the job that you want to have and let them tell you whether or not you're qualified for it. Don't try and determine that for yourself. I mean, if you have no experience and somebody's applying, you're probably not getting a principal manager position, but don't hold yourself back on that. The worst thing they'll do is say no, and then you just put that in your check one down in your rejections for the day and call it a win. Yeah.
As far as the whiteboard interview goes, is it mainly just pseudocode, or do they treat it like if you're ever in an environment where they specifically will work in like C++ or something, will they do a specific C++, or is it always pseudocode?
It depends on the place. Some places want it to be code that you could just like take and type into a computer and it compiles and runs. And even it varies by individual, and some people want pseudocode, right? Like there's just no consistency to it at all.
Okay.
Yeah.
So since you were working at PopCap and you were like a junior working with a senior, what would be like the one major tip that your senior told you about coding while you were working at PopCap or a studio like that?
Yeah. So I was like I came in PopCap mid-level and left as a senior. But yeah, in terms of that was probably where I leveled up the most because it was the first time I'd really like worked in a closely collaborative team environment with a good manager and a good team. And I would say, man, I have so many. Here probably the two things. If I had to distill it down to two things, I would say number one, engineers who are willing to walk across the floor to go ask a question of somebody else are really rare, and if you do that, you'll stand out. I have a story about that I can tell in a second. The other thing I would say is always, so don't gold plate, don't overbuild things, but always do good work, right? Like don't rush. And I think it's very hard to find that balance, and that's one of the things that comes with professional maturity. But it is, if you, so there's this phrase I like, it's called squirrel burger. And there's this story where, so a guy, there's a burger shack, right? And it's open 24 hours. And this guy walks in late at night and he goes, hey, I see you got like a $7 burger there. All I've got is, $2. And the night manager is working and he wants to, give this guy what he wants, but he can't sell a burger for, $7 burger for $2. So he kind of goes in the back and he rummages around and he finds some old buns, from the day old pile. And he puts them together and he's got, he doesn't have a pickle, but he's got like a cucumber that's getting a little old, so he puts that on there. And he goes, I gotta get a patty. And so he walks outside and he sees this dead squirrel and he goes, perfect. And he takes a shovel and puts it on the grill and he serves this guy a squirrel burger, right? And the point is you should never serve anybody a squirrel burger because nobody wants a squirrel burger. If somebody asks for a burger and you don't have time to make a burger, do not give them a squirrel burger. Tell them that you only have time to give them a bun because otherwise you're not doing any favors to anyone. And so practically what this means is that if somebody says, hey, I need you to build this huge complicated system by next week, you say, I'm sorry, I don't think that's actually possible for me to do. Maybe instead, and the second part is really important, maybe instead we could figure out what the most important part of that is and build that first, right? And navigating that is another thing that takes a little bit of time to do, but I think that people will, after the fact, nobody will remember that you did this thing in a rush. Everybody will remember how good of a job you did on that thing. So if you rush and you give somebody a squirrel burger, nobody's going to go, wow, he made a $7 burger in $2. Everyone's going to go, that dude served me a squirrel burger. Don't do that.
That's a great story
Yeah.
to end on.
Yeah, that's also not, that's not me who came up with that. I forget that's the thing I read somewhere, but it's one of those things that stuck with me. Are we out of time?
Yeah, but I just want to also say, last couple weeks ago, I got to talk to a whole bunch of recruiters, and they said do the 20-minute rule. If there's something you don't understand and you're sitting there trying to work on it and you don't get it, just fess up. Just go over and say, I'm not getting it. So just the 20-minute rule, I think it was. So only don't go on and on and on and on and not understand and waste everybody's time and maybe the deadline or whatever, but 20 minutes, just go ask somebody.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. Also, really quickly, my personal Twitter, if anybody does that, is
Oh my God, you all do it.
Okay, it's Overstood, Overstood, like kind of the opposite of understood. It's my personal one, so I kind of post whatever I'm thinking about or retweet funny things, but sometimes I also do professional things. So, do it at your own risk. But if you want to follow me and if you have any questions about game industry stuff, I'm always happy, or industry stuff or anything else, I'm always happy to answer that. And if you're an artist and sketching something while I was talking, if you tweet that to me, I would really appreciate it.
All right, so you guys know to thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Put the chairs away and wrap it up.